The engine of the rusted truck rattled, a sound Tom Wilson had heard every morning for 35 years. He gripped the wheel, knuckles white against the cracked surface. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, the road ahead was a familiar blur of gray asphalt and suburban driveways. He pulled up to a house, cut the ignition, and stepped out into the damp morning air. Inside the basement, the air tasted of stagnant water and cold concrete. A pipe had burst. Tom knelt, the floor biting into his knees as he laid his wrench and pipe cutter in a precise line. He did not rush. He did not speak. He focused entirely on the metal, his hands moving with the steady rhythm of a man who had performed this exact motion thousands of times. The water hissed, then slowed to a drip, and finally stopped. He sat back, the silence of the basement pressing in around him. He gathered his tools, wiped the grease from the pipe, and stood up. The job was finished. No one had watched. No one had thanked him. He simply packed his kit and walked back toward the truck, ready for the next call. Back in the cab, Tom wiped his hands on a rag, the coarse fabric scraping against his calloused skin. His father's voice surfaced, clear as if he were sitting in the passenger seat. If you do what you say you will do, opportunities will follow. It was the only rule that mattered. He started the engine, pulling away just as another contractor arrived at the site next door. He watched in the side mirror as the man slapped a cheap patch over a leaking joint, moving with a frantic, hurried pace. Tom kept his eyes on the road. He had learned early that speed was often just a mask for incompetence. He measured his success by the absence of return calls. When a job demanded an hour, he gave it 90 minutes. He stripped the old threads, cleaned the corroded metal, and fitted new parts until they held without a flicker of doubt. Every joint he sealed was a promise kept. While others chased the quick payout, Tom focused on the integrity of the connection. He did not need to shout his value. The work itself, solid and silent, left no room for failure. By the time he reached the next driveway, the lesson was settled in his pulse. The phone in the truck console vibrated. A new client. A neighbor had passed along his number after a basement disaster 3 weeks prior. Tom pulled over, listened to the frantic request, and quoted his rate. The caller did not haggle. They did not ask for a discount. They simply asked when he could arrive. This was the pattern now. Referrals flowed in like water, filling his calendar weeks in advance. He did not spend a single cent on advertisements. He did not have a page on the internet. He did not need to shout to be heard. He watched the city blur past his window, thinking of the other contractors who spent their evenings crafting flashy posts to drum up work. They were chasing the wind. He was simply chasing the next pipe. There was a unique weight to this kind of success. A quiet gravity that came from knowing his name was synonymous with a job done right. He turned the key, the engine hummed, and he drove toward the next house. He was not just fixing leaks. He was building a foundation of trust that no marketing campaign could replicate. The silence inside the truck felt earned. He did not need the noise of the market to know exactly what he was worth. Between jobs, Tom stopped carrying his lunch into the truck and started carrying books. He found a worn copy of Napoleon Hill in a second-hand bin, the pages soft and yellowed from use. He read in the quiet gaps between service calls, highlighting lines about the necessity of persistence over raw talent. It struck a nerve. He realized that the same patience he applied to a stubborn pipe could be applied to his own finances. He walked into a bank on a Tuesday morning, the air conditioning humming in the sterile lobby. He sat with a clerk, his hands still bearing traces of grease from the morning's repair. He opened an account with a modest initial deposit. He set an automatic transfer for a fixed amount, pulling it from his earnings before he could even consider spending it. It was a tiny, invisible movement of numbers on a screen, yet it felt as permanent as a soldered joint. He watched the clerk print the receipt and tucked it into his wallet. Every month, he repeated the contribution. He did not watch the market. He did not chase trends. He simply let the habit take root. The money began to move, climbing by small, steady increments, mirroring the slow, deliberate work he performed every day. The assignment was simple: a persistent drip in a basement sink in a part of town Tom rarely visited. The owner arrived halfway through the repair, clutching a ledger. He explained the math, pointing to the rent check he received every month without lifting a tool. Tom listened, his wrench suspended in midair. He looked at the walls, the floor, the structure. It It was not a palace, but it was functional. It was an asset. That night, Tom sat at his kitchen table and calculated his own savings. He did not look for luxury or status. He looked for a property that offered utility. He spent the next 3 weeks walking neighborhoods, testing door handles, and checking foundations. He found a small, neglected house near the train tracks. It was solid but ignored. He signed the papers on a Friday morning, the ink still wet on the page. He walked through the front door of his first rental, not as a plumber coming to fix a leak, but as the owner. The sense of purpose was different. He was no longer trading his physical strength for an hourly wage. He was building a system that functioned even when his hands were idle. He had begun the transition from laborer to architect of his own future. The rhythm settled into a relentless, grinding cadence. Tom spent his mornings under sinks and his afternoons managing tenants. One house became 2, then 3. The plumbing business acted as the engine, providing the cash that fed the real estate investments. Yet, the pressure was not in the work, but in the restraint. As his bank balance rose, the temptation to upgrade his life whispered in every shop window. He looked at a new truck, touched the cold metal of the door, and then walked away. He drove the old one home instead. He kept his expenses locked in a vise. Every dollar saved was a brick added to his wall. Friends bought boats or took vacations that required credit, but Tom stayed the course. He lived in the same small space, ate at the same table, and kept his schedule rigid. The years blurred into a singular, unwavering loop of labor and reinvestment. He did not chase the spotlight or the noise of the market. He focused on the math of the next property. He was building a fortress, one disciplined day at a time, hidden beneath the surface of an ordinary, unremarkable life. The numbers grew, silent and steady, while he just kept working. The truck idled at a red light, the engine shaking the frame. Beside Tom, the new apprentice stared out the window, his brow furrowed. He had been watching Tom for weeks, tracking the way he organized his tools, the way he never rushed a joint, and the way he ignored the phone when it rang during a repair. The apprentice shifted in his seat, his hands resting on his knees. He asked, "How do you actually do it? How do you become successful?" Tom did not look over immediately. He kept his eyes on the road, waiting for the light to change. He tapped the steering wheel twice, then pointed toward the back of the truck. He pulled over into a quiet lot, cut the engine, and turned to face the younger man. Tom reached over, popped the latch on his toolbox, and swung it open. He picked up a wrench, turning it over in his calloused palm. "One tool does not build a house," Tom said, his voice level and steady. "And one day does not build success. You are looking for a shortcut, but it does not exist. You need thousands of disciplined days stacked one on top of the other until the weight of them creates the result." He closed the lid with a sharp, final click. The house was quiet. Only the faint, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator broke the silence of the kitchen. Tom pulled his laptop across the wooden surface, the screen casting a pale glow against his tired face. He opened the banking portal. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, navigating through folders and spreadsheets that he had curated for over 3 decades. He paused. The cursor blinked in the search bar, a steady, pulsing heartbeat of data. He exhaled, a long, slow release of breath, and hit the enter key. The screen refreshed. Columns of interest, dividends, and principal balances shifted, aggregating into a single, final figure. He watched the digits align. 1 million. It was not a sudden explosion of noise or a celebration. It was a silent, static number on a black background. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. He did not reach for a phone to share the news. He did not stand up to pace. He simply sat, looking at the screen, letting the weight of the last 35 years settle into the room. The milestone was reached. He stared at the total, seeing not just the money, but the thousands of mornings under cold pipes and the relentless, quiet years of choosing the long road over the short one. Tom looked away from the monitor. His eyes traced the familiar cracks in the plaster above the stove. The kitchen looked exactly as it had 20 years ago. The same wooden chairs, the same scuffed linoleum near the door, and the same heavy, reliable silence. He stood up and walked to the entryway. His work boots sat on the mat. caked with dried mud and bearing the deep creases of 1,000 jobs. They were the same boots he had worn when he started, just resoled and patched. He picked one up, feeling the weight and the familiar grit of sand against his thumb. The $1 million on the screen felt distant, almost foreign. It was a tally of his time, a byproduct of the thousands of pipes he had sealed and the thousands of calls he had answered. But it was not the goal. He set the boot back down with a firm thud. He was still the man who showed up on time. He was still the man who kept his word. The money was merely the shadow cast by the work, not the object itself. He looked around his home, realizing that his life had not changed because he had never sought to be someone else. He had simply been himself, day after day, until the ordinary became extraordinary. The next morning, the rhythm resumed. Tom knelt on the concrete floor of a client's basement, his wrench gripped firmly in his hand. The client stood nearby, pacing, his voice tight with anxiety about the world's rapid, unforgiving pace. He spoke of missed opportunities and the fear of falling behind. Tom listened, his attention split between the man's words and the steady drip of the leaking pipe. He turned the valve, tightened the fitting, and wiped the excess moisture away with a rag. He stood up, looked the client in the eye, and spoke with calm, deliberate clarity. "The people making the most noise," he said, "aren't always making the most progress." The client stopped pacing. The basement went silent. Tom did not wait for a response. He gathered his tools, packed them into his kit, and turned back to the remaining work. There was no need for grand declarations or further explanation. He had spent his life building a foundation, not chasing headlines. He picked up his pipe cutter, adjusted his grip, and began the next repair. It was a simple, ordinary action, and in that stillness, he found everything he had ever worked to build. He kept his head down, focused on the task, and continued.